Good morning, friends. Welcome. I'm Tanita Kanaj. I am with you this morning from the Office of Equity and Community Engagement. Thanks to the Northrop Collegiate School and Blake School classes of 1955, Flora, Caitlin, and I are here to introduce a very special guest that'll be sharing with us this morning. Kao Kalia Yang is a Hmong American author, filmmaker, and teacher. She is also co-founder of Words Wanted, a company dedicated to helping immigrants with writing, translating, and business services. Her writing and speaking is passionate and eloquent as she seeks to deepen the understanding of the human condition in order to garner more compassion in the world.
Kalia was born in Vinai refugee camp in the Vinai refugee camp in 1980. She and her family came to Minnesota as refugees in the summer of 1987, and her first book, The Late Homecomer, a Hmong family memoir, reflects upon this move. It is a first-hand account of the journey that many Hmong people had to make from place to place in order to find home. A review by Publishers Weekly praises Kalia, saying, quote, "Yang tells her family's story with grace. She narrates the struggles, beautifully weaving Hmong folklore and culture. It is the first Hmong-authored book to gain national distribution from a literary press, the only book to ever garner 2 Minnesota Book Awards, the best-selling book in coffeehouse press history, and earned an NEA Big Read title."
Her latest, The Song Poet, a memoir of my father, is the first Hmong book to ever receive national recognition and representation. Minnesota Opera announced last Monday that it has commissioned The Song Poet for Project Opera, its youth vocal training program. The opera will have its world premiere in May 2021. Jane Hamilton Merritt proclaims that Kalia's writing allows us to hear the whispered sorrows and hopes of those transplanted onto foreign soil among strangers. When she's not in front of an audience inspiring social change and awareness, Kalia raises twin sons and a daughter that keep her and her husband busy at their home in Minneapolis.
Let's give a wonderful, warm Blake welcome to Ms. Kao Kalia Yang.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Hello, Blake. I'm delighted to be with you all today. I never thought that I'd be speaking in front of people like this, certainly not when I was your age, and I did not think for a long time that I would stand as a writer. My writing journey began when my grandmother died. So my family came here, as you heard from the introduction, when I was in 1987, July 27, 1987. I was 6.5. I'd never gone to school. In the refugee camps of Thailand, there were over 40,000 people on about 400 acres. If you can begin to visualize, it's about a square mile in radius. So we were on top of each other. And growing up, I couldn't go to school because I could not do this, and this was the test for maturity. This was the filter for whether you could go to school or not in an overcrowded refugee camp. I grew up in a place where Hmong people only got food 3 days a week because Thailand was practicing a humane deterrence policy. They didn't want more Hmong refugees coming from Laos into their country. They could not sustain more Hmong refugees. And so in this place where I was born, the number one cause of death was suicide. All these people who remembered a time before, a time when we were free, were killing themselves in captivity. Many were suffering from PTSD from the war with the Americans. I don't know if you all know, but when the war, in the history books, there's nothing about the Hmong, but there is something about the Vietnam War. When America waged the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia, they crossed the border to Laos, and against the United Nations Commission, they enlisted 32,000 men and boys, and when I say boys, they were 9, 10, and 11 years old, to fight and to die on America's behalf. Laos was the most heavily bombed nation in the history of the world. Even today, more than 50 years after the bombing campaigns, the bombs left in Laos still manage to kill at least one person a day. History books will tell you that the war ended in 1975. For my family, it did not end until 1979, until we crossed the raging Mekong River into that refugee camp. And right now, if you read the New York Times, every few years there's an article about the 800 or so families still fleeing from a war that the world has declared over for over half a century. Dates, these things that we learn in our history books, are crutches to learning. And me, I was born in that place where little girls like me were traded for bottles of fish sauce, where hunger and death were everywhere. Every time, because we only got food 3 days a week, every time a man or a boy would venture beyond the fence to get food, they were beaten and sometimes killed. When women and girls went in search of food, they came back, hair in their face, blood seeping between legs. I saw all this as a child. And so I looked at my grandma, who was already an old woman. By the time I came along, I was her 78th grandchild. She was down to a single tooth standing right here. My grandma, who was a medicine woman, a shaman, and a healer, sought after, the only person in the camp who can wander beyond the fence because the Thai soldiers, because of the STIs they were suffering from, they needed her cure, so they allowed her to walk beyond the fence. And I thought she was incredible. I thought she was magical. Seeing the death all around me, I used to cry for my grandmother never to die. I made all the adults in my life promise me that they would never die. I remember after crying for a day and a half, my grandma looked at me and she said that she would not die, that she would not leave me. When we came to America again, July 27, 1987, Grandma lives in California and we live in Minnesota. This is before cell phone plans, so we couldn't afford the long-distance phone calls to her. I learned how to write so I could write her love letters, knowing that my grandmother would never be able to read them because my grandmother had never been to school. She didn't know how to read or write. Every letter was the same letter. Dear Grandma, how are you? I know that you're in California now. Here, the kids, they don't know that I have you, but I know that I have you. What do you do with your everyday? Do you still remember me? I love you. It's still the same letter I write in my journal whenever I miss my grandma, although she's been gone since 2003. My grandma told me that education was the garden that I tilled in America and that one day we would reap the harvest together, and I believed her. I was a senior at Carleton College when my grandma took a fall in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, during winter break. And I remember going to her. She's lying on the sofa, and I say, Grandma, get up. She looks at me and she says, Vinai, I'm not getting up again. You have to understand that there were people who loved me before you. Before you, I had a mom and a dad and brothers and sisters, your grandpa, my most beautiful baby girl. And while there is no Hmong land in the map of a bigger world, there's this Hmong mountain in my heart. I'm going to climb this mountain. I'm going to open up the door to the house of my youth. Dinner will be ready. Everybody will be waiting. And they'll look at me and they'll say, why are you so late in coming home? It would be selfish of you to cry for me to stay. I reminded her that she'd promised me, but she just shook her head. And every time I said, I love you, she just said, I know, Vinai, I know you do. That was my grandma's response to my love. Grandma's biggest fear was that she would be forgotten. When she died on February 18, 2003, and I had to return back to Carleton College to finish my comps. It's a comprehensive exam at Carleton so that I could graduate. The world moved on as if my grandmother had never lived. And so this book, The Late Homecomer, my first book, began as a love letter to my grandma. I was young, so I thought I only needed to write one last final love letter to get everything out. I was on page 37 when my father walked into the room and he saw that I was writing. He says, what are you doing? I looked at my dad and I said, I'm writing a love letter to my grandma. My father looked at me and he said, you know that if you dream in the right direction, the dream never dies. The dreamer never wakes. The dream only gets bigger and bigger. I'd gone to Carleton like generations of immigrants and refugees before and like those who will come after to become a doctor. We, the Hmong, like so many others, believed that we needed doctors and lawyers to survive in America. Doctors heal what is broken in the human body. Lawyers protect the rights that we've never had enough of. But my father's words changed the trajectory of my life. I decided that I would write a book about my grandma so the world could miss her with me. I decided that you did not have to be a man or a woman of letters to have lived the lessons worth learning from. And so the late homecomer began. I began writing the book as a 22-year-old. I'm going to read a little bit from the book for you today. The dedication. For my grandmother, Joa Lee, who never learned how to write. To my baby brother, Maxwell Huya, who would read the things she never wrote. It begins with an epigraph. Before babies are born, they live in the sky where they fly among the clouds. The sky is a happy place, and calling babies down to earth is not an easy thing to do. From the sky, babies can see the course of human lives. This is what the Hmong children of my generation are told by our mothers and our fathers, by our grandmothers and our grandfathers. They teach us that we have chosen our lives, that the people who we would become we had inside of us from the beginning, and the people whose worlds we share, whose memories we hold strong inside of us, we have always known. From the sky, I would come again. The book begins this way because I was once a teenager. We lived on the rotting east side of St. Paul, one of the most impoverished parts of the city. We lived in a 900 square feet home. There were 8 of us and then 9 of us. It was a 2-bedroom, 2.5 because one room didn't have a closet and it led directly into the single bathroom we shared. The walls were wild with mold. No matter how much my mother scrubbed with bleach, no matter how many layers of paint my father applied, the walls were wild with mold. We were continually sick in this house that I grew up in, always sick. But it was our house and it was our life. It kept the winter away and the rainstorms at bay. It was our house. But I was a teenager and Titanic was in the theaters. And I'd never gone to a movie theater before because we didn't have the money. Simple facts, we didn't have the money. But to be normal in America, I pretended that I'd been to the movie theater. To be normal with my friends, I pretended that I knew what it was all about. Didn't ask too many questions, acted nonchalant when they talked of the films in the theaters. Titanic, though, was in the theater. We didn't have cable television, but every night at 6:30, Entertainment Tonight had a special on Leonardo DiCaprio. So I was madly in love. Madly in love. One particularly cool day, my friends were going to go and see Titanic after school. I couldn't go. The routine was very simple. After school, we got on the bus and we came home immediately so that we could take care of the kids so mom and dad could go work their second shift jobs at the factory. We all needed to do our jobs, otherwise the house wouldn't hold and social services might come and take us away. Very simple formula. But that day, walking back, all I could feel was the weight of the books in my bag. So I got home, and I saw my father sitting on the sofa, tying his shoes, safety-toe boots, getting ready to go to work. And I walked right up to my dad, and I slammed my books down on the ground, and he looks up, and I tell him, this is not the life that I wanted for me. I want something better. I want something more. That was all I planned. I didn't plan anything else to say after that declaration, okay? But my father looks at me, and I can see the wash of liquid in his eyes. And for a moment, I think I've made my father cry. But then he looks away, he looks back at me, and he says, Vinai, I would choose you all over again if I could. And a long time ago, when you were just a baby, a spirit high up in the sky, when you could see the course of rivers and the trajectory of mountains, you saw a young man and a young woman walking without shoes, and you chose to come down to us. My father got up and he limped to the door because he stood up all night by the machine, so his feet were in continual pain. He limped to the door. I had nothing to say. My father turned back and he said, life is going to teach you the strength of the human heart, not of its weakness or fragility. I could hear the car door slam. My father left. Many, many years later, I'm in New York City. I'm studying at Columbia University, and I tell my people that I'm going to write the story of our journey to this country. Not simply the memoir of my grandma, but the story about how we came to be in this country. Because I was tired of living without understanding on our side. All of the white people, all of the people asking all the time, what are you people doing here? You're doing nothing but slowing us down. In our rags. I was tired of it all. So I was going to write this book, and it was going to help everybody because it was going to garner more understanding in the world that we lived in, the world that we were part of, the Americans that we were becoming. And the only way I knew how to start out the book was to say to my father the words I could not say to him that day. From the sky, I would come again. Books are not written in chronological order, so I wrote the back before the front. I wrote the back in the months of missing my grandmother, and I'm going to read to you a little bit from the back. I don't believe in keeping the endings of books a surprise. You all know by now that most of us end up dead. It's not a surprise. If there's enough land left, we go under. If there isn't, we'll probably be stacked up going high up, right? The beauty of life, the gift of a book, is the adventure that we go on in between, the discoveries that happen on the journey. And so in the end of The Late Homecomer, my grandmother Jolie dies. Her paperwork say that she is 93 because her birthday was fake. We didn't know her real birthday. We just had to have, you cannot become a refugee without a birthday. So we faked her birthday. And she told me that she'd always said that she was over 100. But this is the very last conversation I had with my grandmother. This is the reason why I stand before you today as a writer. I entered Uncle Ang's house and I wiped my feet on the rug. I looked up and I saw my grandmother in a hospital bed beside their east wall. She looked like she was sleeping. I took off my shoes and I approached the bed slowly. Aunt Chu was sitting by the side of the bed on a chair. A few relatives were on the sofa by the window talking quietly. When I saw that Grandma was not sleeping but struggling for breath, her hair matted with sweat, her lips opening and closing in desperation, her one tooth showing, the image became blurry. I got as close as I could to her. I felt the resistance of the bed rail against my thigh. I put my head on her chest. I said, Grandma, I am here. I said, Grandma, are you okay? I said, Grandma, I love you. I said, Grandma, don't leave me. I said, Grandma, Kalia is here. I said, Grandma, are you okay? I said, Grandma, I am here. I said the same things over and over, and my heart was heavy in my chest, and every breath became harder. I made a lot of noise. She raised a tired hand to my head, and she said, Grandma knows. I said, I love you, Grandma. And she said, don't cry, Vinai. Grandma knows. She tried to say more things to me, and I tried not to cry, but neither of us could do what we wanted. In all the languages of the earth, in all the richness of words, there is no word, no comparison, no equivalent for my grandmother trying to be strong for me, her one Vinai. When you write a book about somebody, you get to spend time with them. You get to visit your memories with them. My grandma, who I told you had always been an old woman for me, used to say, one day you're going to be an old woman and you're going to sit by some window somewhere. And maybe all your teeth will be gone. And the foods that you love, you won't be able to eat anymore. They'll just be the ghost of flavors on your tongue. The men and women who you cared for and who cared for you, they too will become memories, Vinai. I want you to go and live your life making the kind of memories that you want as friends. So you're not surrounded by all the things you fear, all the things you regret, but all the people you've loved, all the good that has come from this journey. I've tried to live my life in accordance with my grandma's words. She's been gone now for like nearly 16 years. And I still speak to her in the present tense. When The Late Homecomer first came out, Barnes & Noble and Borders and other bookstores did not want to have it in stock. They said that the Vietnam War was so unpopular. They did not know if Hmong people read anyway. But a lot of teachers, a lot of women went into those bookstores and they asked for the book. I don't know if you all know, but Minnesota, the Twin Cities, is home to the biggest concentration of Hmong in the country. Hmong children dominate the St. Paul public schools. We're the biggest population. If you go to the farmers market or in St. Paul or Minneapolis, many of those farmers are Hmong. Bây Hmong. Cô nia cô chỉ yêu cô đâu cô cho lưu, vậy cô nhân sẽ hai cha. Cho nên cô cho lưu nhân đời cô lưu xia. This is the language that I was born to, and these are the people that I was born to. I did not know that in the writing of this book, I would be making history, not only Hmong history, but American history, for America has never seen a writer like me before, particularly from these parts. You know, outside of Minnesota, when people introduce me as a Minnesota author, people look and they look and they look again because they cannot believe it. This is the land of Garrison Keillor. They don't expect a writer like me emerging. And as I said to the class I just visited, when the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America advised the use of the Hmong in that war because our lives didn't mean anything, because they believed that we would have all died in that jungle, and that nothing of this war would ever surface into the world, they could not have imagined a writer like me emerging, of all places, from here. Could not have imagined my life. Against all the statistics and studies that you will have read, that you will read in the years to come, here I am. Girls like me from refugee camps like Vinai, from the housing projects of St. Paul, do not get to go to schools like Carleton and Columbia. My father is right. Life has taught me the strength of the human heart, not of its weakness or fragility. I stand as an impossibility. And that is why I'm here today. I'm invited all over the country. Invitations are coming from further and further away. But I chose to come here because I recognize that for many of you, students here at Blake, you don't know who the Hmong are. Maybe you see us at the farmer's market. Maybe you pass by us on the street. Maybe we're just one more group of hungry refugees trying to find a place here. But I don't know. I know for a fact, actually, it's not that I don't know, that I am the first Hmong author invited to Blake. Many years ago, I did a book club. And again, this year. And if I don't come through that door, when is it going to open up again for another writer like me? So I came. I came not looking for your understanding, not looking for your agreement or disagreement. I came in search of a deeper understanding. Not only for the Hmong story, but for your own. Unless you are Native American, it was not many generations ago that your families came from somewhere else to call this place home. America is America only because when I look at you and you look at me, we offer each other belonging. That is the only gift we can give as citizens of one nation. We live in tumultuous times. Many of you will go on to become the leaders of our community. You will make the laws that govern so many of our lives. How could I not come? It's taken thousands of years to bring me here. How could I not come? And so the late homecomer made history, and I realized something. You do not have to be tall. You do not have to be white. You do not have to be male to make history. History is made by men and women, people like me, like us, in this here room right here, right now. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, they fought for a beautiful dream. They fought for a dream where we could all belong. We could all live with dignity. They died in the quest for that dream. They didn't die because that dream came true. It was the magnitude of that dream, the size of that dream that they left behind. And I stand in the work of that dream still today. This Hmong refugee, who 38 years ago was on the other side of the world. I said to the lower school kids, if you have a globe and you stab through St. Paul, you end up somewhere where I was born, on the other side of the world. Journeyed a long way to be here, to belong, not only as a Hmong American writer, but as an American writer contributing to world literature. And so I knew after the late homecomer that I had to write more books. Anne Fadiman, who wrote The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, the most taught book across American institutions. When she met me, she didn't talk at all. She and her husband, George Holt, took me to a nice, fancy dinner in Connecticut. This is a poor kid from the project, so I was already out of my element. But Anne didn't talk at all. She was very quiet. And afterward, Anne said, I didn't talk because I wanted to hear you speak. I wanted to hear if you were a real writer or if you only had one book inside of you. Anne said, but you are a real writer. I was young. I was caught halfway in between feeling like that was a compliment and then feeling like she wanted me to prove something. Why did I have to prove one more thing? But I knew that I had to write a second book. Except the fact was, this one is, creative nonfiction memoir, but everywhere I went across this landscape, the American landscape, everybody was telling me that they didn't know about the war. They didn't know who the Hmong were, that maybe this book was fiction and that maybe I'd written a novel. And so for the first 3 years after the publication of the book, me, a selective mute, went on a speaking tour for 3 years where I did over 365 talks a year. Can you imagine? There was this one particular year where I celebrated my birthday with 4 different organizations. And at this final school in Minneapolis, they had this giant cake for me to cut, and they had a photo of me on it, and I had to slice my own neck to feed the kids. It's been an incredible journey. But because all of the words had gone into the world, they couldn't go onto the page. But then I got married. I fell in love, and I got married, and this man I married said, "You cannot do any more public speaking. You have to write a book." I was also pregnant with our first child. Let me rephrase that. I was pregnant and I lost that baby at 19 weeks. 20 weeks and they would have considered infant death, 19 weeks and it's considered a miscarriage. And a lot of women around the world go through this experience, particularly in America, indigenous women and women of color, disproportionately so, we lose our babies. More and more studies are coming out, and they're saying it's because of the racial traumas that we experience, the wars that we've waged, that we've gone through, we've survived, the wars that are waged against us. And so I lost a baby. In the process, my father also lost his job. Not just him, but 15 of his Hmong co-workers who worked in a factory in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, they all lost their job. They lost their job because everybody on the day shift, all the white workers only did 1 machine a day, but at night, on the night shift, everybody was expected to run 3 or 4 different machines. They didn't want to talk about racial equality. They knew that at the employee appreciation luncheon, it was the Hmong men who were told to eat the hot dogs that fell on the ground, not the other men. They wanted to talk about safety. We were just then hitting the great economic depression that we are surfacing from. And so their supervisor told them, "You're replaceable. You can stay, you can go, you're replaceable. F you." And so my father and the coworkers, they said, "We're going to go home until we have a conversation," because some of them had worked in the factory for like 10, 20 years. So they came home the next day. We all got express letters saying, "If you don't return to work right now, you've forsaken your jobs. You don't qualify for unemployment. This is it." And my father and those men, in a last-ditch effort to tell us not only how hard they could work, but what they were worth, they did not return. And so I had to write a book. And I had to write it in a hurry. The Song Poet, my second book, I wrote in 2 months. And I'm going to read a little bit from it. The world sees my father as a machinist. For many, many years, that was how I described him. But I've always known he is a song poet in my tradition. Whenever my father sings, "Whole rooms bigger than this one," cry. As a kid, I was always embarrassed because of the emotions that my father evoked. I did not understand the emotions that he had to carry, the experiences that he had to hold close. But this book is about the economic depression. It is about a Hmong man in the factories of Minnesota and the birth and the death of poetry as I know it. So I'm going to read a little bit from it. For the suns that rise on the horizons we've yet to see, for my brothers and sisters, my sons and daughters, for my father in Biya who sings his lonely song so that we may hear the trembling of the still fluttering heart. Gutia is, in the words of Ralph Ellison on American Blues, an impulse to keep the painful details and episodes of a brutal experience alive in one's aching consciousness, to finger its jagged grain and to transcend it, not by the consolation of philosophy, but by squeezing from it a near-tragic, near-cosmic lyricism. As a form, the blues is an autobiographical chronicle of personal catastrophe expressed lyrically. Gutia songs can be duets, the voices of fathers and daughters coming together, different verses within the same song, stanzas in the same poem. A writer does not become simply because he or she has a story to tell. A writer becomes in a language because they want to push the parameters of meaning in that language. And so for me, the first memoir, right? I've already exploded the genre of memoir. Memoir is generally books written about one person. This book is called A Family Memoir. I've expanded the reaches of the memoir. For the song poet, I wanted to push the form further. And so instead of like a traditional book with chapters, I am mirroring this after an album. so I can then break the rules that govern prose, right? In prose writing, we're taught, do not repeat yourself. Be as concise as possible. In America, we're all taught that the shortest distance between any 2 points is a what? A straight line, right? If I call it a songbook, if I approach it like that, I can all of a sudden play with different structures of the poetic structures and make my father's poetry come alive. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from the album notes. As you can see, I don't have notes before me. I'm not reading a speech. I'm just talking. I hated, as a child, as a kid, as a student, when people stood up in front of me and just read from some speech. I wanted to be in conversation, never spoken at. So I'm going to read this, and then we'll be in conversation. And for those of you speaking, I will say it now. As you can hear me, I can also hear you, okay? It's hard to do public speaking. Many of you know this. It's hard to stand in front of a room and give out your heart, throw your heart out there. Not your mind, because we can argue all day, but your heart out there. So just so you know, if you're speaking, the speakers can hear you just as you can hear them. Album notes. My father would never describe himself as a poet. In Laos, he was a fatherless boy. In Thailand, he was a refugee waiting in the dust. In America, he is a machinist. Through it all, he has been a poor person yearning for a father and living to be one. My father is Jumua's husband and the father of 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. My father says that on his gravestone he wants it known that his wife and his children are his life's work. He would love it if we could add, all of Mbiya's children became good people. I'm the only person I know who describes my father's work as poetry. I'm not referring to the pieces of hard metal he polishes, the rough edges he makes smooth, the coarseness he evens into shine. I'm talking about the songs he composes day and night in Hmong, our language, his Gutsia. My father is not a writer. He does not write down his compositions. He is a singer. He sings them. It has taken me a long time to gain the courage to call my father's work poetry. For much of my life, I've described my father to the world as a machinist, not as the poet I know him to be. I didn't have a way of conveying how being my father's daughter has not taught me how machines work, but rather how the human heart operates. I grew up hearing my father digging into words for images that would stretch the limits of life for my siblings and me. In my father's mouth, bitter, rigid words become sweet and elastic like toffee. His poetry shields us from the poverty of our lives. On the colorful woven plastic mat in the middle of the living room floor, we sit around my father. We look at the walls with him. The mold growing wild becomes the backdrop of the beautiful paintings we see on television. The peak of this mountain, the descent of that river, the sliver of tree that clings to life on the edges of the rocks, open and exposed. We point at the things we did not see before our father's words gave them shape, gave them alternatives, possibilities. My brother Tzu sees a crane at the river's edge. Shilu points to the sky with its cloud families, gray and rumbling, and whispers of bad weather approaching. For a moment, we're living in a priceless, ageless piece of art. In the deep of winter, after months of unseasoned cold, my father points outside our front window at the ice-covered mounds of snow shining in the bright sun under a cloudless sky of blue and says, "Look at the garden of winter. The snow flowers are blooming today." My siblings and I leave our places by the big heater with its opening single blue flame, and we look out into a picture of winter we thought we had grown sick of. We blink against the shine. Beneath our lashes, in the sliver of open eyes, stars twinkle in the colors of the winter rainbow. The children marvel while my older sister Dao and I take deep breaths and breathe foggy air onto the glass pane. We draw the flowers of early spring. On the cold, wet glass with our fingers, buds of tulips and daffodils, the bursts of dandelions, and fragrant lilac blooms. The sweet, clean scent of magnolia blossoms and the images of the flowering trees stocked with soft, white, pink, pinkish red, and purplish white petals remind us that warm weather and abundant flowers are coming our way. The world of winter becomes bearable in the promise of spring. In perfect pentatonic pitch, my father sings his songs, grows them into long, stretching stanzas of 4 or 5, structures them in couplets, repeats patterns of words, and changes the last word of each verse so that it rhymes with the end of the next. He is a master at parallelism. The language is protracted, and the notes are drawn deep and long. The only way I know how to describe it as a form in English is to say, My father raps, jazzes, and sings the blues when he dwells in the landscape of traditional Hmong song poetry. Different shapes come forth from the dirty places. Different possibilities are born in the shadows of our lives. And windows emerge in the places my brothers and sisters and I have only ever seen walls. That's from the song poet. It's a critically acclaimed book, right? Because it was up for 5 of the biggest national literary awards. So the Chautauqua Prize, the Danes Literary Peace Prize, the PEN USA Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, among others. But your average reader isn't picking it up because the life of a working-class Hmong man in Minnesota is unattractive. Because people like to limit writers like me and the things we write of to the color of our hair, the tint of our skin, and the color of our eyes. And so they think I'm writing only of the Hmong experience. They don't understand that every time an artist is at work, every time a writer writes, it is the pulse of humanity that we're trying to feel. But I'm tenacious. My daddy says that I'm like the dog after the scent of a bone. I don't know when to let go. So 3 years after its birth, we're celebrating the birthday of the song poet. 3 years after its birth, and 11 years after the birth of the late homecomer, they live and they live still. They live because I live. Because in the fall, I will have 2 more books coming out, including a debut children's book. And I don't know why other writers write, but because I write because there's a need. I write because the children in the St. Paul Public Schools, there's never been a book from Literary America written for them. It is time. And whether I feel qualified or not, whether I believe I'm good enough or not, if I don't try, we will not know. If I don't try, how much longer do we wait? And so this October, the first literarily published book by a Hmong American writer about a Hmong American family enters into the world. And then another one, What God Is Honored Here, writings on miscarriage and infant loss by and for Native women and women of color. Because while this country, in America, women of color and indigenous women suffer disproportionately from infant loss and miscarriages, there's nothing for us. So my friend and I, Shannon Gibney and I, are going to put forth that collection. It's exquisite, and I'm very proud of it. And because I live, because all these books will be coming out, these 2 books cannot die. That is the writer you have before you today. So I welcome your questions and your comments, and we'll be in conversation. You can ask me anything you want at all, just as I say anything I want at all in front of all of you. And I will respond in the best way that I know how. And I will try to make my responses thoughtful and useful for the work you do. So please talk to me. Thank you.
If you have a question, you can come up to the front. You can come up to this microphone with your questions or raise your hand and there's a microphone in the back that we'll bring to you.
You know, I give you this time because it's not fair if you don't ask me any questions at all and you go on social media and you say I'm boring. It's just not fair. You know, you have an opportunity to ask me what you want to know, so please talk to me.
Hi, I'm Cheryl, and I really love what you said about the strength of the human heart. Would you say that it's something more internal or also the strength of those around you?
Such a good question. I think it was, who was it? An American president, I think it was Roosevelt, who said that it takes 3 generations to raise an artist. 3 generations. I stand here and living within 1 generation. We're first-generation Americans, right? And I'm an artist. That's possible only because Mom and Dad allowed me to take a second mortgage on their home so that I could finish the writing of The Late Homecomer. I'm here because my older sister, Dao, said to me that life in America is like a ladder. She's going to be the first here so I could be the second. She stayed at Hamlin so that I could go to Carleton. She stayed at Hamlin Law so that I could go to Columbia. She became the lawyer I needed so that the strength of my backbone can grow, so that I can go in front of spaces like this and make the kind of speeches I do, so I can go onto the page and do the kind of work I do. It would be impossible without a huge team. At home right now with my children who are all down with the newest viral infection, they're very trendy, my kids. You know, is a superly educated white man with no hair, a lot of facial hair and glasses. He comes from these parts, right? But he's at home with my children, so I can be here. So I can get up this morning, get ready, and get out. And he will get up even earlier tomorrow, so I can be at the other campus by 6:45 a.m. I'm here because of an immense team. My very first speaking invitations, I'll tell you a story. So I was first invited to go to a feminist bookstore in Madison, a feminist bookstore that I loved. They invited me of all days on Mother's Day. My mother and I drove all the way to Madison. We got there and the store was completely empty. And they said, read. And then the clerk walked away and there was no one to read to but my mother. I stood there, that was the hardest reading of my life. After that reading, I knew I could read anywhere. You know? But my mother stood there, and after I was done, she clapped. She clapped for me. Whenever I get afraid, I think about that woman clapping in that lonely bookstore. And I'm not afraid anymore. When I first started going on tours, and it was first Hmong kids from all these like middle tier, lower tier schools inviting me. I drive all these distances, and I go to speak, and my mother, whenever she needed to go to the bathroom, she'd go in search of a bathroom. There were many colleges and universities that deny her entry into the bathrooms, telling her that they were for members of the community. But my mom, she wasn't afraid. Instead of stopping, instead of saying no, she decided that she wanted to use every single bathroom we ever visited at every single institution, That kind of strength raises a daughter like me. I live because of that strength. I stand here before you because of those individuals. And that's just naming a few. But I'm here today because there are a few people in this room who believe that the message that I come from and that I have to deliver is something that would be of immense use to you in your individual lives and your education. Nothing happens because of one person. Art cannot survive without people lifting it up. Did I answer your question? Okay. And if I don't, you have to ask me again because every person deserves a second chance. Okay? Anybody else? Yes?
How long was the process of writing The Late Homecomer? Did you start writing it as soon as, in your head as soon as your grandma died, or before then?
That's a wonderful question. It's an easy question because it's a process question, right? So you're kind of giving me candy. I started writing it after my grandma died. I submitted a part of it for a class with Jane McDonald, who no longer teaches at Carleton, but she was the first person to read anything. And it was about the fitness of mothers, because we were talking about welfare moms, and I wanted to talk about my welfare moms. And in doing so, right, kill that stereotype. And so it started there. I was 22 years old. It's a young person's book. I was 22 years old. By the time, so I am the second person ever to have completed Columbia's MFA program in 2 years. It's generally people take 5 years, but my funding was being cut at 2 years, so I had to finish, right? So in 2 years, I had the bulk of The Late Homecomer done. I had this natural talent, and it's not an intelligence thing, it's just a talent for being really useful with my time. And so I took classes on writing about war, I took classes on writing about poetry, and I took classes writing from the margins. And for each of these classes, I was able to produce chunks of the book. So I came back with pretty much a finished manuscript. And I came back with an offer to teach at NYU's Gallatin School. And I knew that if I came back to the Midwest, such an opportunity wouldn't come to me again. But I came back because I thought about it this way. There's the life of Kao Kalia Yang, but there's the life of Kao Kalia Yang as a writer. If I'm thinking about my life as a writer, where did I want my story to come? Why not have it come right here from Minnesota, from the fine independent publishing houses here? Why not have it come from the center of Hmong life in America? And so I came back to finish it. But I'm a fast writer. On average, I average about 29 pages per 2 hours. And that's because I'm not thinking, I'm just writing. And I'm not editing myself in the process either, which is to say this. Some of what I write never deserves to be seen, people. Do not be impressed. Some of what I write does not deserve to be seen. Trees do not deserve to go down for those words to live. Okay? But I think that for many writers like me, you're always working against the tide of confidence, right? You're always riding that tide of confidence. And so if I don't produce, then nothing gets done. And when writing time is so precious, you gotta produce. And so I produce, and half of it is crap, but the other half is worth looking at again and again. So that's my process. Write as fast as you can. Because you're going to die soon, people. I'm 38. If I'm lucky, I have 38 good years of writing left. That's it. That's all. It took me a long time to get to these two. It's not going to take me a long time again to get to the next, right? Because I have 10 books down, all sequenced to go in the next 5 years. This is what every young writer dreams about, to be on a publishing schedule. Because you live and then you die. You live and then you die. So then, have to be productive. Anybody else?
Hi, I was wondering, I knew you were, I heard you were selectively or mute as a child, and I was wondering what helped you use your voice again, and like how did you become to realize that you needed to use it?
It's a wonderful question. I was a selective mute. If you look at my St. Paul Public School files, all over they have in red pen selective mute. And I stopped talking. So we got here when I was 6.5. I stopped talking by the time I was 7. And I stopped talking because of a very, very clear moment. My mother, who at the time was 25, I'm 38 today, if you can begin to imagine. So my mother was 25 at the time. We went to Kmart because the lights in our house had started flickering. And my mom didn't know the one word for light bulb. So she went to the desk and she pointed to the ceiling and she said, "I'm looking for the thing that makes the world shiny." But my mother spoke with a thick accent. And the thing about speaking in a different language, and all of you study different languages, so you know, the more impatient a listener is, the harder it is for you to get the words out, right? So then the clerk started tapping on the desk, and the harder the tapping, the faster the tapping, the harder it was for my mom. When she struggled out the words, the clerk walked away. And there was this clock behind the desk so we could see 15 minutes passed. And my mom and I stood there waiting for her to return, but she didn't. And then my mom bowed her head. And that was the first time I'd seen my beautiful, my young mother defeated. At work, people were telling my dad things like, "B, you're here to talk to the machines, not to me." And so I decided that if the world that we lived in did not need to hear my mom and dad, then surely it did not need to hear me either. So the next day I stopped talking. And at first it was my choice, it was my rebellion. But slowly the rebellion swallowed me up because I was a child. And then when I did try to speak again, the rust was so thick that other kids would look and they would laugh. And my voice died inside of me. But my words had to go somewhere. And so they went onto the page. My first time publicly speaking, I can tell you the exact date, April 10, 2008, the day The Late Homecomer came out, and it was released at Concordia St. Paul. There was a storm that night, so I didn't expect anybody, but there was like some 300 people in the room when I got in. I couldn't talk, and after struggling, my father came up to me, and he said to me, "Vinai, from hardness you can give birth to gentleness. If Hmong tears can reincarnate, it would rain the world with our sorrow, but because they cannot, they can only green the mountains of Pumbia. If you speak, if the winds of humanity blow, then maybe our lives are not lost. For every Kao Kalia Yang you meet, 2 others died so I could be here." This is not some metaphorical language. This is not some fictional fact. It's the way it is, right? Most of my generation are given recycled names of the people who died without a funeral, people who died somewhere on the way to escaping the bullet. So then I had to speak. I speak because the work I do is more important than who I am, than the preferences I have internally. By nature, I'm shy. I'm reclusive, my husband would tell you. I like to live with my flowers and my probable fish. I like to go fishing. My probable fish that I've never caught. Though that would be what I would do every single day if I could. Not the hunting part, but living hunting. That's a life I want to live. There's a country song, you know? But that because of my father's words, I speak. And then sometimes I get emails, a lot of times I get emails from people in the audience who tell me, "I would never pick up one of your books, but the words you said have changed the way I think about the world or the way I feel about myself." And then it's worth it. That my daddy reminds me often, when I write on the page. When I speak, I get an opportunity to write on the surface of the human being. That's valuable. It's not to be wasted. So then I speak. Anybody else? Okay.
Could I? Sorry.
Please.
So you mentioned that you have 3 children, right? How has your mother and your grandmother influenced you as a mother?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a special one. I don't get that one very often. So my mother says that she left her mother at 16. She left her mother at 16 to marry my father, and then the soldiers came and they divided them up. My mom carries this memory that she wakes up from and she cries still, where they're visiting her mother for the last time, and she doesn't know it's the last time. So her mother says, I'm going to go to the water to carry water. And my mom, she's 16. She's standing beside her young husband. She doesn't go after her mother and hold her close. She doesn't even say goodbye. She walks away, and she never sees her mother again. And because my father was only 3 years older than her, he didn't tell her to go and give her mother a hug. He didn't tell her to hold on tight for one more minute. She lets go, and she never sees her mother again. But my mother says that her mother, when she thinks about her mother, she remembers this woman who gave her the sweetest part of a yam, the juiciest morsel of chicken, who saved the very best for her. That's the kind of mother I have. So my mother has carpal tunnel from all the years in the factories, and every time I say I want to eat something, she makes it for me. But in the moments when she doesn't see me looking, she's massaging her hands, throbbing red hands in pain. She's turned towards some window somewhere and she's massaging her hands. That's my mom. My mom, who always was the one to open the door for the Meals on Wheels people every Thanksgiving, because you can't afford a turkey. The kind of life I come from, the Meals on Wheels people would come. It would always be my mother who opened the door. Every Christmas Day, my mother disappeared because she was the one waiting in line so that we could have something to unwrap in the lines for Toys for Tots. That's my mom. My grandmother, and I only know one grandmother. I don't know her mother. I only know the grandmother that raised me. She was intimidating, And I say this because, it encapsulates her character to the fullest. My grandma only knew 2 English words. Every time the phone rang, she'd like to answer, and she'd pick it up, and she'd say, "Lo," listen for a moment, and then say, "No," and hang up. That's my grandma. I'm very much a combination of those 2, if you can imagine, My mother, who was literate in a generation when most women her age were not, who was very good in school. In fact, she had this concrete memory. I'm very much her daughter, and then I'm very much the woman who's as low and nose granddaughter. I thank you for your time. I hope that this has been useful for you. I know that you will meet, and you have met many speakers, but I don't think that you will meet somebody who will speak so genuinely from their heart. It's a hard thing to come by, certainly for me, and I think it will be on your journeys as well.
Can we ask just a couple more questions? I've got 3 people back here who've been waiting. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
What advice would you give to young writers about writing your story? Because everyone has a story, and it's difficult,
Yes. So I have this memory, and I keep journals, and I remember a journal entry that I wrote, and I was so frustrated and so sad by something that was happening in my life that I wrote, "How does a writer become?" And I pressed so hard that I ripped the page up. And on the next page, on the very last line, I wrote, "She keeps on writing, period." Minnesota is home to the finest independent publishing houses, arguably in the world right now. We have Grey Wolf, we have Coffee House Press, we have Milkweed, and we have Lerner, we have so many others. Minnesota gives out more grants to writers than any other state in the nation. In fact, we are the only state where it's written into our constitution, because of the Land and Legacy Grant, that we must fund our artists and our arts initiatives. This is the place to do it from. You're in the right state. The key is to keep on writing. Write first for those who would understand before you reach for those who wouldn't, because courage is a fragile thing for a young artist. It's a fragile, sparkling thing. So write first for those who would understand before you tackle those who wouldn't. But in the end, you have to believe in the story that you write, in the truth of who you are, because that is the most powerful thing you can give on the page. It's the most powerful thing you can give on a canvas or a photo, any form of art, actually. Is that useful?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Niharika, and I was wondering, how do you find a balance between assimilating into American culture and preserving your own Hmong culture? Because I'm half Indian and half Korean, and I know, and I was born in America, so I know especially it's been challenging for me to connect with my own 3 cultures here.
It's a wonderful question. So I'm raising interracial kids too. So I think about the question from multiple perspectives, not just my own experience, but that of my children. You know, this is funny. So in the Hmong culture, when you really love somebody, you sniff them in. Like if you see newborns, people will sniff in their smell, or lovers, right? If you really love each other, you sniff them in. I remember the first time I saw people kissing. We're at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, and we just gone to America, and there were these 2 lovers, and they saw each other, and they were kissing, and it was a rubbing of surfaces. So I went right beneath them, and I looked up like this until my mom pulled me away. Right now, I'm capable of doing both. Options, my dear. Each culture, each world that you get to enter gives you options. The more options you have, the better decisions you can make. Very simple answer to a very complicated question, but I think the key is to give yourself as many options as possible. Is that useful? Options.
Nhớ Columbia Nadieli. When I was around 4 years old, my dad would brag about his friend Kao Kalia about her new book, and I've read it and really appreciated it. And my question was similar to Niharika's. My dad always told me that I'm in this life that he never lived, and that being my father, his job is to have provided me a life not like his. And so speaking Hmong isn't as natural as I'd like it to be. And so how would you advise finding that identity again?
That's a wonderful question. Your father's artwork graces my office wall. So every time I write, I'm looking at that big golden heart that your father put on my wall. I want to tell you that. I don't even think your dad knows that. But I can hear the oceans of emotion in you, and I feel them in myself. My mom and dad were the Hmong from Laos. My great-grandparents were the Hmong from China. I'm the Hmong from Thailand. You are the Hmong from America. I cannot stand up here and say you're any more or less Hmong than me because your Hmong doesn't sound like mine. You are the Hmong from America. You are the future of what Hmong is. That's what I can tell you. I can tell you that where you will take the Hmong, we have never been before, my dear. You are a pioneer. You are a pioneer, and you will have to be. You are making history with every breath that you breathe. It's a lot to put on a young person, but it's a lot of faith and a lot of love. You are surrounded by people who love you. I speak Hmong. My little sister Shell, who's a lot younger than me, so when I say little, she's a lot younger than me, and I raised her in many ways. She always loved the way I sounded in Hmong, so now she sounds exactly like me. What do we have to give to the next generation if not the very best of ourselves? Then your daddy is trying to give you the very best of what he has to offer. And you have to trust that the memory of who he is will live on in you, and you will give that to your children in whatever language you're most comfortable in. And that doesn't take away from your Hmongness at all. It cannot. On the other hand, Hmong is a deeply poetic language. It's a beautiful language. And there are Concordia village camps for Hmong now in St. Paul in the summertime with really, really good teachers. You know, so you have embedded in our community. This is why I can't leave the Twin Cities, right? But you have embedded in our community institutions to fortify the thread of your connection to Hmong. You will always be able to find, I hope and I believe in these cities, connections to these parts of you. But I believe in the Hmong you are. I believe in the Hmong you will become and the places you will take us. Thank you all for being here, for having me. Thank you.